Okay, guys, so up to now we've seen how we can create some basic objects.
Pretty fun.
We've seen how we can move the objects around.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's take all of this to another level. Let's mix the two together.
Let's make objects from objects.
That's right. We are now going to discuss how we can duplicate objects.
Cool.
And with duplicate objects, we're going to get some really interesting scenarios that come up.
We're going to show how objects can reproduce asexually.
That's correct, in several interesting ways. But you're going to see what I mean by it really is a combination of knowing how to create an object and then knowing how to use the transform tool that's going to allow us to duplicate objects.
Very cool.
So the most basic approach. Let's create something. So here's the creation part.
A sphere.
Right. Now we'll grab our
Perfectly modeled, by the way.
tool.
Move
so
tool.
hit W. Now what we're going to do is hold the Shift key down.
Can we go full screen?
Sure. Alt W.
I feel so much
Yeah.
better.
So now while holding...
You want me to turn off the grid? G?
All right, that's good. Let's focus.
Okay.
While holding the Shift key down, we're going to now make any transform to our object.
Right. So I'm holding down Shift, I'm clicking on my gizmo and dragging it to the left.
And you can do anything. You can rotate like this. You can scale like this. You can even just kind of nudge like this.
Exactly.
Very cool.
And the moment Bill lets go of the mouse button, we're going to get a dialogue. Ta-da! This is our clone options. And there's all sorts of very handy things available to us that we can do to control the way this new duplicated object is going to respect the rest of the scene, if you will.
That's right.
All right, we can, first of all, make it a copy. Let's do that. Copy, okay. These two guys are standalone objects. They have nothing whatsoever to do with one another. And what we need to do to make this very apparent is we need to bring the modifier stack into this. Now, I know we've only talked about it lightly when we went over the command panel in an earlier video. So right now you might have to just kind of bear with us a little bit, but we're not going to do anything complicated. So let's go ahead and jump over to the modifier panel, and let's add something like a twist modifier to this.
Sounds good. Twist.
And up that angle like crazy. Now, take a look at this. We have now modified the new duplicated object named Sphere02 and nothing on the first one has been affected.
It's an Irish sphere. Sphere02.
So I was slowly trying to get that out. But you can see what I mean by it's a standalone. Now let's go and select the original sphere. And now let's add a bend to it.
All right.
And up that angle. And again, there's no effect going back and forth between the two. They stand alone.
Right, they're not sharing any information.
Right, you
That's
might say that these two objects are unique.
Now, you will find yourself in situations as you learn how to develop complex scenes in 3ds Max where it would be nice to be able to work on one object and have another object follow along. A very simple example would be, let's say you created half of a human head, and you want it to duplicate and mirror that other half. So as you're now working on one half, everything you do is going to show up on the other half.
Right.
Well, in this particular case, we could take two different approaches. We can make an instanced copy or a referenced copy if we planned on doing all of our work on one side.
Sure.
But let's go ahead and undo a few times. Let's get back to a single sphere. Let's make this very apparent. So let's go ahead and do a shift drag again. Now, there we go. We did a copy. Let's now do an instance. And click OK. Both spheres are really the same sphere.
That's right.
One way to look at it. There is now what I like to call a two-way channel of communications. Anything you do to the original sphere is done to the duplicated sphere.
And there's also a very subtle indicator of this over in the modifier stack. You'll notice the name of the sphere itself is visible in bold.
That's right.
Whenever you see this, it's kind of a way to let you know that this object has been instanced.
So let's see if we can throw a twist on, let's say, this guy.
Sure. So basically you're saying that any modifier that I apply to the first sphere will affect the second sphere and vice versa.
That's correct. Two-way channel of communications.
And you wanted a twist coming right up.
Oh, what do you know? There's now
two gizmos for the twist.
Two gizmos. So as you change that angle, now let's select the duplicated sphere on the left. What do you know? Same twist, same angle. And it affects the original. So again, the information is going back and forth.
That's right. Very cool.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
And
as I guess just another way to make that really drive home, you could have applied that twist modifier to either one of these objects, and it would have affected them both.
Let's go ahead and apply the bend now to this one. So we've got the duplicated one selected.
Okay.
And we'll put the bend on it. And again, gizmo's apparent on both and affecting both objects.
Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that you can create multiple instances, of course. It doesn't have to be just one. So if you have many objects instanced from one another, anything you do to one will affect all of them.
That's right.
Very cool.
Keep that in mind.
However, now I only bring this up because I've seen some beginners get a little confused by this. This does not extend to transformations.
Right.
You can take an instance and move it, rotate it, and scale it about your scene, and it will stay independent. What we're talking about are modifications, things that take place within the stack.
That's right. Now let us go ahead and do a reference. All right. Now, a reference is a one-way channel of communications where anything we do to the original geometry will be passed off to our duplicated referenced geometry.
And again, something very interesting has taken place over inside the modifier stack. Again, our name is in bold, but something else that you may not notice at first has just happened.
A gray divider bar.
Dark gray divider bar that appears just over the name. Now, this is going to become very important here in just a moment. For now, let's go back to our original object, and we'll apply a modifier.
Sounds good. Let's give it another twist. Twist is right here.
That whole alphabetical order thing.
Yeah. And you'll notice one-way channel of communications, meaning what we have done to the original geometry has been piped down to the duplicated object.
Right.
So both objects have the twist. But now let's go back to what Zach was saying about the divider bar. If we select the duplicated object, we still have the divider bar at the top. We see the sphere, then we see the twist. So for some reason, the divider bar continues to stay at the top.
Right.
But does it always stay at the top?
Absolutely not.
Nope.
Now let's demonstrate this one-way channel of communications by applying a bend to our referenced geometry. Oh, look at it. He's going to name it for you now.
Look at him get
Just
fancy.
real quick. Really good habit to get into.
I was actually going to point out that you can rename when you create your clone, but we'll talk about that here in just a second.
So now he's done a bend, and you can already see the difference. Look at that. The bend is now being shown above the gray divider bar.
A couple of things, actually. Notice, yes, we are above the divider bar. Also notice that twist and sphere are still in bold, while the bend modifier is not. What that's telling you is that sphere and twist are technically instanced. What you do to one is going to affect both of them, while the bend itself is unique and applied only to our referenced object.
Right.
Just keep in mind, anything that takes place underneath that divider bar is being piped down from the original object. Anything above that divider bar is unique to this reference itself.
Exactly.
Very cool. Let me show him one more quick thing.
Show me.
I'm going to reset real quick. Yes. I'm going to get a cylinder. I'm going to draw it here in my perspective. F4, wireframe unshaded.
Blade of grass.
I'm going to do W, and I'm going to drag it in X. Shift drag, I'm sorry. Let go. I'm going to select instance.
Now, before you click OK, good. You're going right where I want you to.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let's give it a couple copies.
You can increase
here.
the number of copies, and what that's going to do, notice it gives the exact same transformation additively. It adds it to each separate copy. So a great way to create kind of a simple array of objects based on your previous translation.
Now, guys, before we get too far away, I do want to go back to referencing for just 1 second.
Please.
Okay.
While we were talking about what it does, a thing that may come to a beginner's mind is why would you even want to do that? I can see the value of instancing but not referencing, and so here's an example. Let's say that you are creating a space battle.
Is it going to be robots this time?
And you've got a bunch of ships, and they're all from the same fleet, right? But they're going to have different things done to them as they get a wing blown off or this, that, or the other. You can create your master ship, and then you can duplicate a bunch of references. And then, of course, with your referenced objects, you can now go in there and do all sorts of things to whack off a wing, make it very damaged looking, or whatever, right? Without affecting the original master. But now if your client comes in and says, you know, this was pretty cool, but the cockpit area for all these ships needed to be a little bit longer. Now you make that one adjustment back to the master. That information is then fed down to all the reference geometry without affecting your
individual
other modifications that you did to the reference geometry. So they're still all destroyed in all the different ways that you wanted them destroyed.
Very cool.
Very important to understand that that's a good reason of why you would use something like referencing.
I just want to show real quick that you can transform the individual objects, as Zach said earlier.
Absolutely. If we couldn't do that, then it would...
it'd be pointless.
It would be pointless. They can also, not only that, but they can also have their own material applied to each one as well.
That's true.
So it really does come down to modifications, both in the modifier stack and when we get into moving vertices and things like that as well at a sub-level. So it's just when you're modifying the geometry. Okay?
Sounds good.
Let's see. Anything else we got inside the dialogue that we want to talk about real quick? Let's go ahead and do a shift drag real quick.
Could talk about the little quick naming thing.
Yep.
It is very nice to be able to name your objects when you clone them.
Super Blade of Grass.
And if you were to, of course now the clone has been named Super Blade. If you were to increase the number of objects after you name, you'll get Super Blade 01, Super Blade 02, 3,
Absolutely.
4,
That's
and
right.
so on. And finally, go ahead and shift rotate just so that they've seen it.
Sure.
And it's another way to clone.
And again, same dialogue. There you go. That'll be cool. Vroom. And then maybe a shift scale just so that they've seen them all. Excellent. And again, we are duplicating completely.
And they're all instants now, so if you take that bend and change it on one, notice it's going to change it on everybody.
Yep. There's a lot of power to be had in instancing and referencing. Each have their place in scene creation. Now, before we bring this video to a close, the final thing that may pop into a beginner's mind would be, well, this is really cool. But now let's say I get to the point I'm completely happy with whatever reason I needed to use an instance or reference, and I now need to make this object unique, stand on its own. I no longer want it to have any sort of communications with the original object I was cloned from.
Sure.
Okay, how would we go about doing this?
Well, there's a couple ways you could do it. First thing you could do is you could actually hit this little icon right here. This is the Make Unique icon.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and I'll hit that.
Okay.
Notice that the objects in the modifier stack have unboldened themselves.
That's correct. And they
Now if you go in,
stand alone.
Yep.
That's right. They've broken that connection.
And then the other way to do it is go back to one of the instance objects, and then actually go ahead and right-click on the object itself here in the stack and say Make Unique.
Very good.
Very cool.
And later on, you're going to find that instancing and referencing and all, instancing is going to pop up in other places as well, which is really handy. So just kind of get in your mind what an instance is, two-way channel of communications. You affect one, it affects the other. You affect the other, it affects the original. And referencing. You affect the original, it affects the referenced object. But if you affect the referenced object, it does not go back the other way. Okay? So with that, that is going to wrap up this basic introduction to cloning geometry, instancing, and referencing. Thanks a lot, guys.